They say heroes wear medals, give speeches, and live in the spotlight. But sometimes, the greatest protector stands in silence, at the edge of the schoolyard, holding nothing but a cane and a lifetime of battles no one sees. This is the story of Carl Wiggins, a man forgotten by society, but never by the children he watched over. If stories of quiet strength and unseen courage move you, don't just watch, subscribe. Because here, we tell the stories the world too often ignores. Asterisk. Most folks didn't even notice him at first. He was just part of the morning. Background like the rustling of leaves in the wind, or the distant sound of school bells echoing down. Quiet suburban streets. Brookdale Elementary sat nestled at the edge of a middle-class neighborhood, where lawns were neatly trimmed and minivans pulled up like clockwork. The school itself was modest. Red brick walls, chipped white trim, and a black iron fence that bordered the property like a forgotten frame around a fading painting. And every morning, without fail, he stood there, near the eastern gate, by the large oak tree with a tire swing long since removed. He never came past the fence. He never shouted, never asked for money, just stood quietly, leaning ever so slightly on a handmade wooden cane, his frame wrapped in a faded military jacket that had seen far better days. The sleeves were worn thin at the elbows. The buttons were mismatched. But still, it looked like something sacred. His boots were old, scuffed, the leather cracking near the soles, but they were always laced. Tightly, deliberately, no one knew his name. The children called him the Quiet Soldier, though none of them really knew if he was one. The parents had other names. The Creeper, that homeless guy, the Watcher. Most people just avoided eye contact, but the kids saw something different. Some of them would wave as they passed, tiny hands poking out from oversized backpacks. A few would whisper good morning, unsure if he'd respond. He rarely did, just nodded, a small, almost imperceptible dip of his head. And somehow, that was enough. There was one little girl, Sarah, who always tugged her mother's hand and whispered, "He's there again, Mommy." Same spot. And her mother, tight-lipped and clearly uneasy, would mutter back, "Don't stare. Sweetheart, come along now." One boy, Marcus, once ran up and offered him a red lollipop. The man smiled just barely and accepted it with a shaky hand. He didn't unwrap it, just held it for a while, like it meant something, like it was more than sugar on a stick. Then he slipped it into the pocket of his coat and nodded again. But for most adults, his presence was a cause for concern. By the second week of school, the murmurs had grown louder. "He's always here, every morning, just watching the kids," a father grumbled to a security guard one day. "He hasn't done anything, sir," the guard replied, keeping his voice low. "Doesn't talk to the kids, doesn't cross the line. I don't care. It's weird. He makes people uncomfortable." A few parents had already emailed the principal, expressing discomfort and asking for an investigation. Some even threatened to go to the school board. Others snapped photos from a distance, sharing them in private Facebook groups with captions like, "Anyone know this guy? Creepy vibes." The truth was, no one wanted to say it out loud, but the assumptions were easy to piece together. He was dirty, he was old, he was clearly poor, and therefore, in their eyes, he didn't belong. Some said he must be mentally ill. Others assumed he was a pedophile. Some thought he was casing the school for something worse. No one had proof. No one had ever actually spoken to him. But in that neighborhood, assumptions were often louder than facts. Still, he kept showing up. Every single morning. By 7:30 a.m., he'd be there. Always on the same patch of cracked sidewalk. Always standing the same way, one hand resting on the head of his cane, the other often tucked into his coat pocket. His eyes, though, they were always moving. not in a sinister way. More like someone searching, watching, not out of malice, but purpose. Like he was scanning for something only he understood. The thing was, he wasn't invisible. He was simply ignored, or feared, or pitied, but he was always there. One Friday morning, a teacher named Miss Rivera noticed something as she parked her car and approached the front of the school. She saw him bend down slowly, knees crackling. Beneath him and help a little girl who had tripped and scraped her palm. The girl had dropped her lunchbox, and applesauce had spilled onto the sidewalk. He didn't say much, just knelt, picked up the box, handed her a tissue from his pocket, and waited until she calmed down before stepping back into his spot, like nothing had happened. Mrs. Rivera watched from across the parking lot. She didn't speak, didn't intervene, but something about it stayed with her. That small act of care, done without expectation or performance. Later that day, during a faculty meeting, the subject came up. Again, there's a man outside the gates every morning, the principal sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Some parents are getting upset. We've had 3 emails this week. One threatened legal action if we don't ensure their child's safety. A gym teacher rolled his eyes. Has he done anything? No, the principal admitted. Not that we know of, but they're nervous. They're demanding we act. Another teacher chimed in. Maybe we should call the police. Have them ask him to leave? That's when Ms. Rivera spoke. I saw him this morning. He helped a student who fell, very gently. Didn't even say a word. Just helped her up and stepped away. He didn't look dangerous. He looked careful, kind. There was a pause. The room went quiet for a moment. So what do you suggest? The principal asked. Let me talk to him, Ms. Rivera said. Just a conversation? Maybe he has a reason he's there. Maybe we've all been assuming too much. The principal looked skeptical, but finally nodded. Fine. Do it first thing Monday, and take someone with you. Just in case. That weekend, the neighborhood buzzed with chatter. The photo of a stranger at Brookdale had made its way onto the local neighborhood watch page, and comments were rolling in. This is how bad things start. If the school doesn't do something, we will. He looks like he's been living under a bridge. Probably on something. Used to be, we could tell who the good guys were. No one asked who he really was. No one. Wanted to know. By Monday, tension was thick in the air. The man was there, same spot, same posture, same silence. Ms. Rivera walked up to the gate. Her steps were slow but steady, clipboard clutched tight in her hands. She didn't bring security. She didn't bring backup. Just herself. As she approached, the man didn't flinch. His eyes followed a group of kids laughing near the swings. When Ms. Rivera cleared her throat, he turned. Good morning, she said softly. He nodded. I'm Ms. Rivera. I teach 3rd grade. Another nod. Do you mind if I ask your name? Pause. Carl, he said finally. Carl Wiggins, she smiled. Nice to meet you, Mr. Wiggins. May I ask, why do you come here? Every morning. He looked past her, through the fence. His eyes rested on a child tying his shoes beside the bench. Carl's voice was quiet, rough, the kind that carried weight, not volume. Because, he said, I used to stand on the other side of that fence. And I wished someone was standing where I am now. Double quotes. Ms. Rivera didn't know what to say. She didn't fully understand. But something in his voice cracked through the noise of judgment she'd been hearing for weeks. It wasn't fear she felt. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. The Monday after Ms. Rivera spoke to Carl, the front office buzzed with barely concealed tension. Emails were coming in faster than usual. Not about grades or lunch payments, but about the man. One message read, Subject, stranger outside. School grounds. To whom it may concern, This is the third week. I've seen an unfamiliar man loitering near the east gate during drop-off. I'm extremely uncomfortable with his presence. I don't care if he's just standing there. My child asked me if he was allowed inside. Why hasn't the school done anything? Please respond ASAP. Sincerely, Amanda Kelly, parent of Logan. Kelly, first grade. There were more. Some more aggressive. Some vaguely threatening legal action. One suggested contacting the press if the matter wasn't handled immediately. The principal, Mrs. Landry, leaned back in her leather chair, pinching the bridge of her nose. "It's all building," she muttered. "It's going to explode if we're not careful." Ms. Rivera was standing beside the desk, arms folded. "I talked to him," she said quietly. "His name is Carl Wiggins. He's polite, calm, thoughtful. He didn't come across as dangerous." "That's not what the parents see," Mrs. Landry replied. "They see a man in a military jacket and an old cane who doesn't talk. And in their minds, that equals a threat." "But that's exactly the problem," Rivera said. "We're letting fear write the story before we've even read the first page." There was a long pause. Finally, Mrs. Landry sighed. "We're calling a faculty meeting this afternoon. This is more than just a watchful eye now. If this becomes a liability issue," Rivera frowned. "You mean if a veteran keeps standing quietly outside a school? That's a lawsuit waiting to happen?" Mrs. Landry didn't answer. She didn't have to dot by 2:30 p.m. The staff meeting began in the media center. A whiteboard read, "Campus Safety." Addressing parent concerns, Mrs. Landry cleared her throat. "As most of you know, we've had an individual standing outside the school every morning. He's never crossed the gate, never interacted inappropriately. But parent concern has reached a tipping point. So we need a plan." APE coach Mr. Harlan raised a brow. "Is he breaking the law?" "No," Rivera answered quickly. "He's not doing anything wrong. His name is Carl Wiggins. He's a veteran. He helped a student who fell. He's kind." Another teacher, Mrs. Elkins, shook her head. "But kind or not, he makes people uneasy. This isn't a soup kitchen. It's an elementary school. People are protective of their kids." Mr. Harlan muttered, "People are paranoid." Mrs. Landry raised her hands. "Let's stay on track. The point is, perception matters. We have to make families feel safe. And right now, that man standing outside every day, right or wrong, is making people nervous. So what are we doing?" Someone asked, "Call the police?" "No," Rivera said, sharper than she meant. "Not yet." Mrs. Landry hesitated. "We'll talk to him again. Ask him respectfully not to return. If that doesn't work, we may have to involve authorities." There was silence. The meeting adjourned quietly. But the unease lingered in the air like a low-hanging fog. The next morning, Carl wasn't there. The gate stood empty. Cold. The children walked in as usual, but something felt different. Quieter. Off. Sarah, the little girl who always noticed him, tugged her mother's sleeve. "Where's the man with the coat?" Her mother, too distracted by her phone, barely glanced up. Maybe he finally got the hint. By recess, a rumor had already spread that he'd been arrested. Another said he'd gotten sick and died. Ms. Rivera heard it all, her chest tightening with each passing whisper. At lunchtime, she made a decision. She drove to the edge of town near the old freight yard, where abandoned boxcars rusted like memories, and parked by the city shelter. She'd asked around quietly. A janitor at the school had mentioned seeing Carl sleep behind the old pharmacy. She didn't know what she'd find, but she knew she had to go. Sure enough, he was there sitting beneath a billboard that read, "Future Homes, coming 2025. Ironic, given how many people were left behind in the present. Carl sat on an upside-down crate, a half-eaten sandwich in one hand, his cane resting beside him. His military jacket looked heavier today, weighed down by something more than age. "Carl?" she called softly. He looked up, blinked once. "Didn't expect a visit," he said, voice dry as gravel. She approached slowly, unsure what to say. "You weren't there this morning. Figured I'd take the hint," he muttered. "Wasn't my place anyway. It's just, people get scared," she said carefully. "Not because of you, because of the world." He let out a small laugh. "You mean because I don't fit into their world?" She didn't argue. "Because." She couldn't. "Do you mind if I ask? Why do you come to Brookdale?" she said gently. Carl didn't answer right away. His eyes wandered up to the billboard above. The smiling couple frozen in mid-laughter. Perfect hair, perfect teeth. The kind of photo that never included people like him. "I used to live 2 blocks from that school," he finally said. "My wife taught music. We'd walk past those gates every morning, back when we had a little girl." Miss Rivera's breath caught. "You had a daughter?" He nodded. "Amy. She was 7. Loved paint by numbers and Honeycrisp apples." "What happened?" she whispered. Carl's eyes didn't change, but his voice did. Lower, wetter. "She died. Brain tumor. We caught it too late. My wife passed 4 years later. Cancer too. After that, I didn't want 4 walls anymore. I didn't want anyone telling me how to grieve." Rivera was silent, so I just went, found places I could breathe. And when I wandered back to Brookdale one morning, I saw a little girl who looked just like Amy, running in late, tripping over her shoelace. He paused. "I guess I wanted to make sure no one else's little girl ever got hurt. Not on my watch." Rivera blinked hard. "You were a Marine? 30 years? 2 tours. Desert Storm and Afghanistan. Came home with a silver star and a heart that won't sleep." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that said everything. "I don't want to cause trouble," Carl said finally. "If it's better I stay away, I'll stay gone." But Rivera shook her head. "I think people need to know who you really are. What you've been through." He smiled, small and sad. "They won't care." "Not really." "I do," she said. That mattered. Back at school, the buzz hadn't died down. Parents were still emailing. The Facebook threads were still growing. But something began to shift when one of the kids, Marcus, the lollipop boy, stood during morning circle time and asked his teacher, "Is the quiet soldier gone forever?" The teacher paused. "He's taking a break." "Why?" Marcus asked. "He didn't do anything wrong." The kids started talking, telling stories about how he waved, how he helped Sarah when she dropped her lunch, how he tied that kid's shoelace once. Word spread from classroom to classroom, from student to parent. And soon, the narrative wasn't about a stranger lurking. It was about the man who watched over them like a silent guardian. It was a Tuesday morning like any other, the kind where the air carried a sharp edge, autumn biting through jacket sleeves and stirring fallen leaves into little whirlwinds across the sidewalk. Car engines idled impatiently in the drop-off line, and the sound of backpack zippers and squeaky sneakers filled the front of Brookdale Elementary, except today. Carl was back. He stood in his usual place, near the east gate. Same stance, same silence. Same jacket stretched over narrow shoulders. His presence was both invisible and unforgettable, like a ghost who had chosen to linger where he once felt. Alive. Ms. Rivera had convinced him to return, not officially, not as a greeter or volunteer, but as a man reclaiming something that had quietly become his purpose. He didn't announce himself. He didn't make eye contact with parents. But he was there, and that meant something. Some parents noticed. One woman across the street muttered to her husband, "He's back. I thought the school told him to leave." Her husband glanced at Carl, then turned back toward the steering wheel. Just ignore it. But not everyone ignored it. Sarah smiled and waved. Carl nodded. Marcus yelled out, "Good morning, Mr. Carl," as he bounced past the gate. Carl gave him a small salute. The kids were never the problem. And then, at 8:03 a.m., it happened. A group of second graders spilled off the sidewalk, chasing a red bouncy ball that had slipped out of someone's backpack. It bounced once, twice. And then, in that slow-motion kind of way life sometimes unfolds, it rolled into the street. One child, a small boy named Elijah, took off after it. He didn't look, didn't hear the engine, didn't see the dark blue SUV speeding down Maple Avenue, the driver looking at her phone, barely slowing near the school zone. There was no crossing guard that day. Mr. Hayes had called in sick. And then a horn. A scream. A blur. Carl dropped his cane. In an instant. Without hesitation, he moved. Faster than anyone thought a man his age, with his limp, could move. He threw himself forward, into the street, arms outstretched. He grabbed Elijah by the collar of his little jacket and yanked him back just enough. The ball flew past them. The SUV screeched, its tires screaming against pavement. The child rolled to the side. Carl didn't. The bumper hit him squarely in the side. His body crumpled with a sickening thud, thrown several feet before landing near the storm drain. Everything stopped. Teachers ran. Children cried. The SUV came to a halt too late, and the driver stepped out, pale and shaking, phone still in hand. Carl lay motionless. Ms. Rivera dropped her clipboard and ran toward the street, her heart pounding louder than the sirens already. Approaching from the firehouse down the block, she reached his side, breathless, knees on the pavement. His eyes were fluttering. Blood was seeping through his jacket at the ribs. His leg twisted in a way no leg should ever be. Was still, but he was breathing. "Elijah's safe," someone shouted. "The boy's okay." Carl's lips moved. "Barely." "Good," he rasped. That was all. The next few hours were chaos. The school locked down briefly. Paramedics worked fast, loading Carl onto a stretcher, placing an oxygen mask over his face. The dog Samson, who had been tied quietly to a nearby pole, barked furiously until someone from animal control gently led him into a crate and promised he'd be safe. By noon, the story was already online. Local man injured saving child from oncoming SUV at Brookdale Elementary. Witnesses call him a hero. He didn't hesitate. Photos spread like wildfire. One parent had caught the moment just after impact. Carl's body lying in the street. Teachers gathered. The SUV stopped, with its door open. A blurry photo, but one that felt cinematic. Like something out of a war film. Like history unfolding in the middle of a school drop-off. People started asking questions. Who is this man? Why was he there? Why did no one know his name? But Ms. Rivera knew. And soon, so did everyone else. By the end of the school day, the principal's inbox had changed tone entirely. Instead of complaints, she was flooded with gratitude. "Please thank the man who saved that boy's life. I judged him. I assumed the worst. I was wrong. How can we help him? My son talks about Mr. Carl every day. He says he feels safer when he's there. I hope he comes back." It was whiplash, a complete reversal of public opinion. Overnight. Local news vans parked outside the school. Reporters knocked on classroom windows, asking for quotes. The staff huddled inside, shaken and overwhelmed. Meanwhile, Carl lay unconscious in a hospital bed at St. Luke's. Broken ribs, cracked pelvis, concussion. They were watching for internal bleeding. He wasn't out of danger, yet. Samson, Carl's old war dog, was temporarily housed at a local vet clinic, resting by a heater, quiet but alert, and the child Elijah was fine. A few scratches, a scare, but alive. His parents didn't stop, crying for 2 full days. That night, Miss Rivera visited Carl. She walked quietly into the ICU, holding a small bouquet of grocery store flowers and a hand-drawn card from Sarah that read, "You're a real hero, Mr. Carl." A nurse was changing his floor. The room smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. Carl stirred as she sat down. His eyes cracked open. "Hey there," she whispered. He tried to speak. Failed. She smiled through tears. "Don't try too hard. You've already said enough for all of us." He blinked, slowly, then smiled, just a little. She held his hand. "You saved a boy's life today. You know that?" His fingers tightened around hers for just a second, then let go. They sat in silence. The kind that no longer felt heavy. The kind that felt earned. The next day, Carl's story hit the morning paper. Front page. From forgotten to hero. The Marine who watched over Brookdale's children. The article detailed his life, his service, the medals, the trauma, the quiet dignity with which he carried. His pain, how he'd lost his wife, how he walked every morning from the outskirts of town just to stand by that school. People who had once crossed the street to avoid him were now calling him a hero. The irony didn't escape anyone. A GoFundMe page launched within 24 hours. It raised $18,000 by dinner time. Kids brought in handmade cards by the dozens. A local bakery delivered cookies iced with the words, "Thank you, Mr. Carl." Even the mayor called. The narrative had changed, but Carl hadn't. He still didn't want attention. He didn't ask for applause. All he had ever wanted was to keep watch. But now, people were watching him, and they saw something they hadn't seen before. Not a threat, not a ghost, but a man, a protector, a human being who stood in the cold every morning because he remembered what it felt like to be small, scared, and alone. And he refused to let any child feel that way ever again. In the days that followed the accident, the rhythms of Brookdale Elementary changed subtly at first. Then all at once, it began with silence. A kind of collective hush settled over the campus. The laughter of recess was softer. The morning chatter during drop-off lacked its usual buzz. Even the teachers, usually hurried and half-distracted during morning duty, moved with a new slowness, heads turning toward the east gate as if expecting someone who wasn't there. Carl's absence was loud. The plaque hadn't gone up yet. The tribute hadn't been voted on, and the district hadn't made any formal statement. But the children knew. The parents knew. And the staff, especially Miss Rivera, carried the weight of it like a stone in her chest. Everywhere she turned, people were talking, but the tone had shifted. They weren't whispering anymore. They were wondering, regretting. The first ripple came from the PTA. Amanda Kelly, the same mother who'd written the fiery email demanding Carl be removed, stood at the podium during the monthly parent meeting, her voice shaky. "I misjudged him," she said plainly. "I saw a stranger and assumed danger. But that man saved a child's life. He stood out there, quietly protecting our kids for weeks, and I never once stopped to ask who he was." She paused, then added, "I'm not proud of that." A few murmurs, a nod or two. A father in the back clapped, and others slowly joined in. They didn't cheer, but they acknowledged. At the same time, across town, Carl lay in the recovery wing of St. Luke's Hospital. His leg was pinned and wrapped, suspended slightly in a sling. He had 3 broken ribs, a bruised lung, and a stitched gash running down the left side of his forehead. But he was awake now, coherent, and he asked every single morning about Elijah. Is the boy okay? Has he been back to school? Did he cry much? The nurses, at first strangers, grew fond of him quickly. He wasn't a talker, but when he did speak, it was always about someone else. Never himself. Never once did he ask for pain meds unless the nurse prompted. Never once did he complain. When asked why he dove in front of a car for a child he barely knew, Carl only said, "Because it's what I do." That answer puzzled people, moved them. Soon, visitors trickled in. First, Miss Rivera with fresh socks and a warm fleece. Then, Marcus and his mother with a drawing of Carl and Samson in crayon, labeled "My Hero." And finally, Elijah. He arrived holding his dad's hand, wearing a Spider-Man hoodie and a nervous look. When Carl saw him, something in his face softened. "Hey kid," he said, his voice raspy. Elijah approached slowly, then leaned in and whispered, "I'm sorry you got hurt." Carl smiled. It was worth it. And that was all they needed. Back at school, the community continued grappling, not just with Carl's story, but with what it exposed. One teacher, Mr. Harlan, confessed in the break room, "I didn't trust him either. I just didn't say it out loud." Mrs. Elkins admitted she once told her students to stay away from strangers when referring to Carl. Now they all sat at their desks, wondering if their silence had been complicity. But amidst the guilt, something else was blooming. Connection. A movement formed, not organized, not official, but visible. Parents began waving to the security guard they once ignored. Teachers started asking the janitor how his morning was. And the children, they kept drawing pictures of Carl and talking about Samson, and using the word hero without irony. One afternoon, as Ms. Rivera was organizing papers in her classroom, the door opened. Mrs. Landry, the principal, stepped inside. "I wanted to show you something," she said. She handed over a manila envelope. Inside were 30 handwritten letters from students, parents, even staff, all addressed to Carl. "Thank you for watching over my son. I'm sorry I misjudged you. You make me want to be brave. I hope you come back." Ms. Rivera flipped through them slowly. Her eyes brimmed with tears. Mrs. Landry cleared her throat. "The board has agreed to install a small plaque by the east gate. It'll read, 'Dedicated to Carl Wiggins, a quiet protector, never asking for thanks.'" Ms. Rivera looked up. "He deserves more than a plaque." "I know," Mrs. Landry said quietly, "but it's a start." Later that week, something unexpected happened. The local news station returned not with cameras, but with volunteers. They brought gardening tools, shovels, and mulch. Together with school staff and a few parents, they planted a small garden near Carl's spot at the gate. Lavender, rosemary, and a young oak tree donated by a nursery. Someone set up a bench. A retired police officer brought a flag. It became a place. A real one. No longer a nameless patch of sidewalk. It was Carl's corner now. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Carl sat with Samson curled at his feet. The vet had brought the dog by for a short visit under supervision, but when the staff saw how the old shepherd refused to leave Carl's side, they made an exception. "Seems like he's on duty again," the nurse chuckled. Carl patted the dog's fur. He never really clocked out. There were moments of pain. Nights where Carl jolted awake from dreams of war, different time. Times when his wife's voice echoed in his memory and then slipped away before he could hold on to it. But then there were the mornings, with sunrise light crawling through the blinds, and Samson breathing steady on the floor. And cards taped to the walls, and kids, drawings on the table beside his bed, and visits from strangers who now smiled, shook his hand, and said the words he never expected to hear again: "Thank you." Course, not everyone changed. There were still whispers. Still folks who said, "That homeless guy got lucky." Or those who muttered, "This is going too far. It's just a man who jumped in front of a car." But those voices grew quiet. Outnumbered. Because something deeper had shifted, not just around Carl, but inside people. They began to see. And in that seeing, they learned. One day, near the end of Carl's hospital stay, a former student of his wife stopped by. She brought a photo, a black and white class picture from 1986, and pointed to the smiling teacher in the front row. "That was your wife, right?" she asked. Carl nodded. Double quotes. "She changed my life," the woman said. "So, did you?" Carl blinked. "I didn't do anything for you." "You didn't have to," she smiled. "Sometimes just being there is enough." And Carl finally understood that maybe you didn't have to save the world. Maybe you just had to stand in the cold, morning after morning, and keep watch, so someone else could feel safe enough to dream. It was nearly 6 weeks after the accident before Carl was able to leave the hospital. The staff lined the hallway as he was wheeled out. Some clapped quietly. A nurse tucked a small stuffed bear into his lap, a gift from one of the children at Brookdale. And beside him, loyal as ever, walked Samson. The German shepherd had grown slower in his old age, his hips stiff from service and time. But his eyes were bright, and his pace matched Carl's wheelchair like he was still guarding something sacred. Carl didn't say much. He never did. But when the sunlight hit his face outside the hospital doors, and he took his first breath of cold air in over a month, he closed his eyes and smiled, not because he felt good, not because he was healed, but because he was going home. Ms. Rivera offered to drive him. "I can handle the VA shuttle," Carl had said gruffly. But she shook her head. "You saved a child," she told him. "Let me give you a ride." He didn't argue. Her car was small, a little too clean, with a pine tree air freshener that made Carl's nose wrinkle. Samson curled up in the back seat, sighing deeply, like he finally understood rest was allowed. They didn't talk much at first. Just drove through the neighborhoods that had once whispered about him, through streets where parents used to tighten their grip on their kids' hands when he passed by. Carl kept his eyes out the window, watching, always watching. "You know," Ms. Rivera finally said, her voice low, "the kids still talk about you." Carl turned slightly. "Yeah? They leave notes for you in the library. Pictures, letters. Some even ask to have recess near your corner." He chuckled once. "I'm not sure what I did to deserve all that." She looked over. "You showed up." Silence again. Then Carl said something she hadn't expected. "It's strange. I was invisible my whole life, until I threw myself in front of a car." Ms. Rivera didn't laugh, didn't offer cliches. She just kept driving, letting the weight of his words fill the cabin like fog on a window. "You were never invisible," she said finally. "We just didn't know how to see you." They pulled into the modest shelter Carl had called home off and on for the past 2 years. The building wasn't much. Brick with peeling paint, a flickering porch light, and a line of cots inside that smelled like bleach and old soup. But this time, Carl didn't go in. "Come on," Ms. Rivera said. "You're staying at my dad's place." Carl raised a brow. "What? It's empty." "He's with my brother in Arizona now. I already called the VA and cleared it. The place is yours until you get your own. No strings." Carl shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not good with favors. This isn't a favor. It's a thank you." He hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. "All right." That night, Carl slept in a real bed for the first time in months. Sheets were crisp. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and cedar. Samson curled up at the foot of the bed and didn't move. For once, Carl didn't dream of bombs or static radio or the sound of helicopters. He dreamed of laughter, of standing at the school gate, watching them run toward something safe. The following week, Miss Rivera invited. Carl back to Brookdale, not to stand at the gate, not as security, not even as a hero, but simply as Carl. We're having a community reading day, she explained. Would you be willing to visit? Carl looked unsure. To do what? I'm not exactly Mr. Rogers. Just talk to them, tell a story, or listen to theirs. He stared at her, then said, You really think I've got something worth saying? She smiled. I know you do. On the day of the event, Carl wore a button-down shirt someone had donated. It was one size too big, but clean. His boots were polished. His beard was trimmed. And Samson walked beside him wearing a little blue bandana that read, Reading Buddy. The children's eyes lit up the moment they saw him. Mr. Carl. Marcus shouted, running ahead with a book in hand. You came back? Carl chuckled, taken aback. Yes, I did. They gathered around him in the library, on beanbags and carpet squares, crayons scattered across the floor. Someone handed him a book titled The Invisible Boy. Fitting. Carl cleared his throat, read slowly, stumbling over a few words at first, but then settling in. His voice, though rough, had a gravity the kids leaned into. His pauses carried meaning. His silences said more than most sentences. And when he finished, one little girl asked softly, Were you ever invisible too, Mr. Carl? He looked at her, then nodded. For a long time, he said, but it's okay. Because invisible people, they still see everything. And sometimes, seeing is the most important job of all. The children clapped. Not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. Afterward, Ms. Rivera found Carl outside, sitting on the bench near his old post. The small garden they'd planted in his honor was starting to bloom lavender, reaching toward the sun. She sat beside him. Feels weird, doesn't it? She asked. He nodded. Like I'm borrowing someone else's life. No, she said. You're finally getting yours back. Carl stared at the playground. I spent years trying to disappear, he said. After the war, after Amy, after Mary. He paused, eyes distant. But showing up at that gate? It was the first time I felt useful again. Like I still had something to give. Ms. Rivera reached over, placed a hand on his arm. You gave a lot more than most of us ever realized. Later that day, something unexpected happened. Amanda. Kelly, the mother who had once demanded Carl's removal, approached him near the garden. Her face was tight with nerves. Mr. Wiggins? She asked. He turned slowly. Ma'am, I wanted to say something. I was wrong about you. I let fear speak for me, and I judged you without knowing anything. Carl didn't respond at first. Just looked at her with the kind of eyes that had seen too much to get angry over something so small. Thank you, he said quietly. Most people wouldn't admit that. She swallowed hard. My son talks about you every day. Says he wants to be like you when he grows up. Carl blinked. That's too much pressure for an old man with a limp, he joked. She laughed softly. Then added, You're the reason a lot of us are seeing the world differently now. Carl didn't reply, but his smile said enough. That evening, Carl sat on the front porch of Ms. Rivera's house. The sun dipped below the trees, painting the sky orange and gold. Samson rested at his feet, snoring gently. Carl sipped from a chipped coffee mug, watching a group of kids ride bikes down the street. He still didn't understand why people cared now. Still didn't know if he deserved it. But for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. He wasn't a mystery anymore. He wasn't a warning sign. He wasn't invisible. He was Carl, the man who showed up. And for the children of Brookdale, that was more than enough. It had been nearly 2 months since the accident. 2 months since Carl Wiggins went from that man by the fence to a town hero. The plaque was up. The garden was blooming. The school's hallway display case now featured a photo of Carl and Samson, surrounded by thank you notes from the children of Brookdale. On the surface, everything looked like it had changed. People smiled more. They greeted the janitor. They asked the cafeteria lady how her day was. They nodded at the mailman Dot. It felt like the school had learned something. But the thing about change is, it's easy to believe it's permanent when nothing is challenging it. Then came Thursday. It started like any other morning. The sky was clear, just a little crisp. Carl had returned to the school grounds, not officially, but regularly. He sat on the new bench every other day with Samson, keeping a respectful distance, chatting with kids who passed by. That morning, he arrived early. Ms. Rivera waved at him from the parking lot. Marcus ran up and handed him a folded paper airplane. Everything felt normal. Until the unmarked van pulled up across the street. At first, no one paid it any mind. It parked by the curb, idle, quiet. Then two men stepped out. Clean-cut, suits, badges clipped to their belts. The kind of men that didn't visit elementary schools for good reasons. They crossed the street slowly, scanning the front entrance like they already knew who they were looking for. Carl noticed. He stood up, eyes narrowed, hand resting gently on Samson's collar. A reflex. Ms. Rivera, watching from the side steps, frowned and made her way toward them. "Can I help you?" she called out, forcing calm into her voice. The taller man glanced her way. "We're looking for a Carl Wiggins. Do you know if he's here?" Carl stepped forward. "That's me." The other man turned. "Mr. Wiggins, we need to speak with you about an incident involving a minor that occurred last fall at Brookdale Elementary." The sentence landed like a punch in the gut. Silence. Ms. Rivera blinked. "Excuse me?" The taller man pulled out a document. "We received a formal complaint this week. It alleges that Mr. Wiggins, while on or near school property, had inappropriate verbal interactions with a student in late September. We're not here to arrest anyone. We're just conducting an investigation." Carl didn't move. His expression didn't change. But something in his shoulders sagged. "I never touched a kid," he said quietly. "Never even raised my voice." "We understand," the man said. "This is procedural. But we do need to ask you to come with us to answer a few questions." By now, parents in the drop-off line were watching. Windows rolled down. Phones tilted. Whispers, loud enough to be felt. "What's going on? Is that the guy who saved that kid?" I knew something was off. It was happening again. Only faster this time. Samson barked once loud. Protective. Ms. Rivera stepped between Carl and the men. "Wait, this is a misunderstanding. Carl's been cleared by the district. He's never been alone with any student. There's no way." "We're not accusing," the man interrupted. "We're following up. That's all." But perception doesn't wait for facts. And by the time Carl was escorted into the van voluntarily, but silently, the damage had already been done. The next day, the internet lit up. The same neighborhood Facebook group that once posted "Hero Saves Boy" now shared a blurry photo of Carl being led into the van. "Is Brookdale safe? Why was a homeless man allowed near our children? District says no concerns, but is that enough?" The comments turned vicious. They should have done a deeper background check. He was too quiet. That's always a red flag. Y'all can keep crying hero, but I call this a wake-up call. No arrest had been made. No charges filed. But facts didn't matter to fear. At school, things grew tense. Missy Rivera tried to speak at the faculty meeting, but people were divided. "I want to believe him," Mr. Harlan said, rubbing his temple. "But what if we're wrong? What if we ignored signs?" "There weren't any signs," Ms. Rivera snapped. "You saw how those kids adored him. He's done nothing but sit on a bench and wave." But now we have parents demanding action. Mrs. Landry said wearily, "We've received 9 emails this morning asking how Carl was vetted, and I've got board members breathing down my neck. Marcus's mother even called the local newspaper. We all jumped to praise," she said. "Now we might be held responsible for what we let happen." Except nothing had happened. Not really. An accusation. Anonymous. Vague. And Carl, who had fought wars, buried a child, saved a boy, was now again a suspect. A problem. A shadow at the edge of the playground. Ms. Rivera visited him at the precinct. He sat in a bland office. Chair, hands folded, eyes distant. He looked tired in a way that went beyond pain. The kind of tired that came from being punished for existing too long. "They said I made a kid uncomfortable," he said quietly. "You didn't," she replied. "Someone's lying. Or someone's scared. Or both." He sighed. "Doesn't matter." "Yes, it does." He looked at her. "You know what hurts the most? Not that someone said it. That everyone believed it so fast." She didn't respond. "Because it was true." After a moment, he added, "I'm not going back, even if they clear me. I can't sit on that bench knowing people are watching, wondering if I'm a threat." "Don't let them win," she said, voice cracking. "Don't let them erase what you've built." "They didn't erase it," he said. "They reminded me it was never mine to keep." But the story wasn't over, because the kids had been watching too. They saw the posts, heard the whispers, saw the empty bench, and they didn't understand. Marcus stood up during morning circle time and asked, "Why is Mr. Carl gone?" "The teacher stammered. "He's taking some time off." "Did he do something bad?" Another child asked. "No," she said. "He didn't." That afternoon, a group of 3rd graders decided to write letters again. But this time, not to say thank you. This time to say, "We believe you. Please come back. Don't let the bad people win." The truth eventually surfaced. A case of mistaken identity. A different man. Same jacket. Same first name. Different city. The district quietly issued a statement. The investigation has concluded. Mr. Wiggins has been fully cleared. No further action will be taken. But by then, the headlines had already spread. The suspicion had been sown. And Carl, heart heavy, dignity bruised, didn't show up that Friday, or the next, or the one after that. Samson waited by the front door. The lavender in the garden wilted from lack of water. The bench remained cold. The lesson had arrived. Not in the moment Carl saved a life, but in the moment the town had to decide, do we love people only when they perform miracles? Or do we stand beside them even when the crowd turns? For a while, the bench stayed empty. The plaque by the garden, dedicated to Carl Wiggins, a quiet protector, stood untouched. But the air around it felt different now. Heavier, like it was holding its breath. Like it was waiting for someone who might never return. Some days, the wind knocked a child's drawing off the bench. A crayon-colored portrait of Carl and Samson. Miss Rivera always picked it up and tucked it back in place. Other days, the students would slow down as they passed, glancing toward the east gate, hoping, expecting, but Carl wasn't there. He stayed away. Not out of anger, but out of something quieter, more painful, disappointment. Inside his temporary home, Ms. Rivera's late father's bungalow, Carl moved slowly now. His legs still ached. The stairs creaked. And Samson, sensing something deeper than physical pain, rarely left his side. Carl spent most mornings sitting at the window. Coffee in one hand, silence in the other. He watched squirrels dig in the garden. He watched birds nest under the gutters. He watched a town move on without him. The news story that once put him on the front page had disappeared. No apology, no retraction. Just a quiet deletion. Carl didn't need the spotlight. Never wanted it. But the way it had been ripped away, that stuck with him. Like a bruise no one could see. Miss Rivera came by every afternoon after school. She brought leftover cafeteria meals, or cinnamon muffins from the corner bakery, or just sat on the porch and talked about her day. Sometimes Carl listened. Sometimes he did single quotes T. One afternoon, she told him about Marcus. He asked if he could write you another letter, she said. Said he misses your wave, misses how he felt when you were there. Carl stared into his coffee. I don't want them thinking I left because of them. Then tell them, she said gently. I wouldn't know how, he replied. Meanwhile, at Brookdale, something unexpected was happening. The children weren't letting it go. They had questions. Big ones. About fairness. About rumors. About why adults say innocent until proven guilty, but act like the opposite. One fourth-grade girl stood in front of the library's Carl Wiggins display and asked her teacher, if they were wrong about him, how many other people do we treat like that too? That question didn't have an answer, and neither did the one Marcus asked during lunch when he stood on a chair and shouted, Why hasn't Mr. Carl come back yet? We wrote letters. A few staff tried to quiet him, but others didn't, because deep down, the school felt it too. The silence, the shame. So the kids did something bold. One Friday morning, a group of third and fourth graders, led by Marcus and Sarah, brought in a giant poster board, taped together from 6 sheets of construction paper. On it, in giant red marker, were the words, Carl, we still see you. Every child who passed the bench that day was handed a crayon and asked to write something, anything. A word, a memory. A thank you. By noon, the poster was filled. You made me feel safe. Thank you for helping Elijah. You have the best dog. Come back, please. Ms. Rivera took a photo, printed it, slipped it into an envelope with a handwritten letter. And that night, she drove it to Carl's doorstep. She didn't knock. Just left it on the porch. Beneath the flickering porch light, Carl found it. The next morning, he sat on the steps. Read every word, even the misspelled ones, especially the misspelled ones. By the time he reached the bottom corner, where Marcus had drawn a stick figure Carl standing between 2 stick figure kids with a heart. Overhead his hand was shaking. Not from age. From emotion. Carl folded the poster carefully. Not like a man hiding something, but like a man holding something sacred. Then he stood, walked inside. And started to pack. On Monday morning, no one expected it. The bell rang. Kids ran toward the gate. Teachers gathered by the front steps, clutching coffee and attendance folders. And someone whispered, Look. Heads turned. There he was, Carl Wiggins, faded jacket, cane, Samson by his side. He moved slowly, carefully, his gait uneven but steady. He didn't walk all the way to the bench, just stood behind it, one hand resting gently on the backrest. The silence was immediate. Then cheers. Not from the adults, not from the children. They ran toward him, slow at first, unsure, then faster, older. Mr. Carl, you came back. Look what we made. Marcus reached him first, handed him a small wooden pin that said, Hero, written in glitter glue. Carl took it with a smile. Thought you forgot me, he said quietly. Never, Marcus said. Not even for a day. From across the yard, Amanda Kelly stood frozen. She hadn't spoken to Carl since the rumor broke. Hadn't said a word either of support or apology. But now, seeing the way her son hugged Carl's waist, seeing the man who had once been dragged into a van, now welcomed like a long-lost family member, something shifted. She crossed the field slowly. Carl looked up. She stopped a few feet away. I judged you. Twice, she said, and I don't have an excuse. Carl said nothing. She looked at him, tears forming. But I want to be better. My son sees you as a hero. I want to see you that way too. Carl finally nodded. Then we start there. She smiled, not wide, but real, and walked back lighter than she'd arrived. Over the next few weeks, things changed again. But this time for good. The school invited Carl to speak on Veterans Day. He declined at first. I don't do speeches, he said, but Ms. Rivera told him, just tell them the truth. So he did, standing beside the bench, surrounded by lavender and laminated crayon art. Carl looked out at a sea of tiny faces and said, I'm not a hero. I've made mistakes. I've been lost. I've been angry. I've been forgotten. But I never stopped caring. And if that's all I leave behind, that I cared enough to show up, then that's enough for me. The applause wasn't loud, but it was deep. That night, he sat on the porch with Ms. Rivera. Sampson at their feet, the stars clear above. You know, he said, I used to think the world didn't want people like me. Too old, too broken, too quiet. She sipped her tea. Maybe the world just didn't know how to listen. He looked at her, then out into the darkness. You think they'll forget again? He asked. She smiled. Maybe. People forget. But you left something they can't ignore now. What's that? She looked at the kids chasing fireflies in the yard and said softly, love that didn't ask for anything back. Carl nodded. And for the first time in a long time, he felt home. Not in a place, but in the way people saw him. Really saw him. Winter came slowly to Brookdale that year. The leaves turned late orange, rust, gold, and clung to the trees like they, too, weren't ready to say goodbye. Mornings were crisper. The sun arrived lower in the sky. But at the east gate of Brookdale Elementary, one thing remained steady. Carl was there. He didn't come every day. Not like before. Some days, his leg ached too much. Some days, he just wanted to sit on the porch with Sampson and sip black coffee in silence. But most mornings, especially the cold ones, he made the effort. And the kids noticed. They'd wave as they passed through the gate. Some stopped for a quick high five. Others brought him small gifts. A granola bar, a snowflake made from folded paper, a drawing of Sampson with a little blue cape. Carl always smiled, always nodded. He never needed a parade. Just presence, just purpose. Inside the school, things were quieter, warmer in a strange way. The events of the past few months had left a mark, not just on policies or on Facebook pages, but on people. Teachers spoke slower now when disciplining kids. Lunch ladies remembered who was allergic to what. A group of parents even started organizing coat drives for families in need, something that would have been dismissed a year earlier as not the school's problem. And near the library, the Carl Wiegans display case had grown. Now it included a folded flag, a photo of Carl in uniform, a timeline of his life drawn by the 5th grade class, showing his military service, his love for his daughter, and most prominently, his time at Brookdale. At the top of the display, written in crooked, colorful letters, it read, he kept watch so we could grow. But change always comes with time. By mid-December, Carl had started to slow down more noticeably. His limp worsened. Sampson was sleeping longer. And some mornings, Carl didn't come at all. Ms. Rivera noticed. One afternoon, she knocked on his door. He opened it slowly. You're checking up on me, she smiled. Of course I am. Inside, the house was warm but dim. The old heater hummed softly. Carl sat down slowly, rubbing his hip. I'm tired, Rivera, he said plainly. Not just body tired, soul tired, she nodded. You've earned that. I keep thinking, he said, about how I used to wish I'd just disappear, that people wouldn't look at me and see a problem. He paused, but now they look at me like I'm something else, and that's harder in some ways. Because it's more to lose? She asked. Because it's more to live up to. She didn't reply, just reached out, placed her hand on his. You don't have to live up to anything, she said gently. You already did. You showed up. A few days before winter break, the school held its annual holiday assembly. The auditorium was packed. Parents, staff, kids in elf hats and angel wings. Everyone ready for songs and sugar cookies and pictures with a tired Santa in a fake beard. But this year, Ms. Rivera added something new. After the second grade choir finished singing, "Let There Be Peace on Earth," she stepped up to the mic. We want to take a moment, she said, to honor someone who became part of our school, not through a title or a paycheck, but through quiet care. She looked toward the back of the auditorium. Carl, sitting in the last row, shifted in his seat. He stood outside our gates for weeks before we ever asked his name, she continued. And when we finally saw him, really saw him, we discovered that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear worn-out boots, carry old canes, and stand in the cold so kids can walk into school feeling just a little bit safer. She gestured to the side, and a group of students stepped forward, holding a large banner. Painted across it were the words, "Thank you, Mr. Carl. You stood for US. Now we stand for you." The applause was long and full, not polite, not performative, just real. Carl didn't stand. He didn't wave. He just closed his eyes for a moment and smiled. 2 weeks later, it snowed. Not much. Just enough to coat the rooftops and cover the grass like powdered sugar. Samson passed away in his sleep that night, curled up at Carl's feet. Just like always, when Carl found him in the morning, he didn't cry. He just sat there for a long time, one hand resting on the dog's back, his breath steady. "Good job, soldier," he whispered. "You're off duty now." Later that week, the children held a small memorial at the garden. They placed a new stone under the oak tree that read, "Samson, faithful to the end." Carl came, limping more than usual, holding a small folded photo of the dog. He didn't speak. He just stood, nodded once, and walked away before the tears reached his eyes. Spring came early. The lavender bloomed in March. The bench stayed warm. Even in the early hours. Carl still came. Not as often, but when he did, the kids still waved, still whispered, "That's him. That's the one who saved Elijah." And Elijah, now older, taller, never forgot. He always stopped, always said thank you, even when no one else was watching. By summer, Carl's health declined. His legs stiffened. Breathing grew harder. Miss Rivera visited daily, sometimes just to sit in silence, sometimes to read aloud the latest letters from students who had moved away, but still remembered the man at the gate. One evening, she found Carl watching the sunset, a blanket over his knees. He turned to her. "I think I'm ready." "For what?" she asked softly. "To rest." She didn't argue. She just sat beside him, both of them looking out at a sky, burning gold and purple. Carl Wiggins passed away peacefully 2 weeks later. No drama. No sirens. No headlines. Just quiet. The way he lived. His funeral was held at the town's Veterans Cemetery. It was standing room only. The mayor came. The sheriff. Teachers. Parents. Children. Dozens of former students. Hundreds of little notes tucked into pockets and purses. At the end, Marcus stepped forward. He was older now. Not a little boy anymore, but still small in the shadow of the man he once ran to every morning. He held up Carl's cane and said, "He wasn't my dad. He wasn't a teacher, but he taught me more than anyone else ever did. He taught me to show up, even when people don't clap, even when it's cold, even when no one says thank you. Then he handed the cane to Ms. Rivera and walked away. Back at Brookdale, the garden still grows. The bench is still there. Children still stop and read the plaque. New kids ask, who was Carl? And someone always answers, he was the man who stood out here every morning, before the sun, before the rest of us understood why it mattered. They say his name now. With reverence. Not as a symbol, but as a story. The story of a man who didn't need permission to protect, who didn't need recognition to care, who gave quietly, and in doing so, reminded a town what dignity looked like. And every once in a while, a child will sit on that bench, look out across the yard, and whisper, I see you, Mr. Carl. Because the truth is ... some heroes don't wear capes. They wear pain and patience, and the burden of having once been invisible, but not anymore. Not. Here. Not at BROOKDALE. Because here, we remember him. We remember him always. Carl never asked for thanks. He never wanted recognition. All he wanted was to stand guard, so no child would feel as alone as he once did. His watch may have ended, but his story lives on in bronze, in memory, and in the smile of every child who now feels safe walking through that gate. If this story touched you, help us keep voices like Carl's alive. Hit that subscribe button, share his story, and join us as we honor the silent valor all around us.